We've been covering for you for months now the most transparent administration in American history, which stopped for 41 days giving press briefings altogether. Sarah Huckabee Sanders is Donald Trump's press secretary, and she has been giving fewer and fewer press briefings over time. And up until yesterday, it had been 41 days since the last one. And all of the normal stuff that we've become accustomed to at these gong show press briefings took place. And I wouldn't be shocked if we don't hear from her again for a very, very long time. Not answering questions, blaming Democrats for everything, and generally speaking, making a fool out of herself, coming out and speaking after, I think it was Stephen Mnuchin and Larry Kudlow, and maybe one other person who spoke before her, speaking to the press. Out comes Sarah Huckabee Sanders, starts getting asked very reasonable questions, like, for example, we have this 3-week stopgap measure, which reopened government. Trump had no money for the wall. Does Trump want another shutdown starting on February 15th? And her answer is, it's the fault of Democrats.
Is the president really willing to go through another shutdown if he can't get any money out of the Democrats for the border wall?
The president doesn't want to go through another shutdown. That's not the goal. The goal is border security and protecting the American people. Ideally, Democrats would take these next 3 weeks to negotiate in good faith, as they've indicated that they would, and come up with a deal that makes sense, that actually fixes the problem, so we don't have to go through that process.
So what she's saying is Trump had the House and the Senate for 2 years during a supposed immigration crisis that was going on then, because it was worse then than now. If it's a crisis now, it had to have been a crisis then. Did nothing to build the wall. Democrats take the House back, and now Trump says either Democrats fix this problem or I shut down the government. It's an absolute and total joke. It's a farce. Next question. The stuff that Trump offered to Democrats in that second crazy immigration speech. Remember when he said, I will do 3 years of extension on DACA recipient status. I will do 3 years extension on TPS, temporary protected status. Reasonable question from the press. Is that still on the table? Trump offered it. Is it still on the table for Democrats? Sarah Huckabee Sanders won't say.
The president's proposals for protecting the Dreamer children, some of the other concessions he made in his immigration speech, are those still on the table?
Look, I'm not going to negotiate here. That's why they have the conferences for congressional members to work through some of those things, come back to the president with a deal. The president has laid out things in the past that he's willing to do. We'll see what they come back with. But what I do know is if they don't come back with a deal, that means Democrats get virtually nothing.
So first answer was it's the fault of Democrats and they need to fix this. Then the question is Trump's offer still on the table? She won't say, but she again says it's up to Democrats to figure this out or they get nothing. And then it gets brilliant in the sense of being evil genius. Sarah Huckabee Sanders is asked, why did Trump hire undocumented immigrants at his businesses? And of course, there is no good answer for that other than to just tell the truth, which is this is what companies do. People like Trump and corporations hire undocumented immigrants and they don't get in trouble. So obviously they're going to keep hiring undocumented immigrants. Check out what she says. Truly Orwellian.
The president has described illegal immigration, unchecked illegal immigration, as a perilous threat and has said that they're taking American workers' jobs. Can you explain why the president hired and employed so many undocumented immigrants at his clubs for years and didn't do more to prevent them from staying employed and working there?
Look, I can't get into specifics about the president's organization outside of the White House. I'm only allowed to speak on behalf of the president in his official capacity. I do know that the Trump organization has put out a statement addressing that issue. I would refer you to that and to them for further questions.
John, what does the president think should happen to a business that, you know, employs illegal immigrants and doesn't use systems to check and make sure they're not doing that?
I think that's one of the reasons that the president wants to actually fix the problem. He's one of the people that's identified the fact that we have a problem and we should fix our immigration system. If Democrats want to get serious about fixing that, they have a president that's more than happy to sit down with them and do exactly that. John?
Yeah. Hey, the president's company hired undocumented immigrants. What about that and what should happen to those companies? Listen, Trump identified this problem. I guess she means by being part of the problem. And if Democrats want to fix it, then Democrats can fix it and he'll allow them to do that. It's evil genius. It's just, it's completely vapid in every sense. And I need to congratulate CNN and MSNBC. They didn't air this, okay? Fox News ran the press briefing live. CNN and MSNBC just stuck to their regular programming. And I've been saying for a while, if you can't fact check it live, since it's so lie riddled, run it later, condensed with fact checking, even do a 5-minute delay so you can do fact checking on screen. I think that there's more going on here than she's just a liar and an obfuscator. I actually think part of the reason she's not answering questions is I don't know that Trump is really speaking to Sarah Huckabee Sanders anymore. I actually think she doesn't know what Trump is thinking and what Trump's positions are on a lot of these issues. And remember, we were told the most transparent administration in history. That ship has certainly long sailed. Let me know your thoughts about this. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Okay, if we want to take advantage of having data to figure out whether a particular policy has succeeded or failed, we need two things, or I guess you could say we need at least two things. We need time to allow that policy to either succeed or fail, or maybe do neither. But we also need to know what to measure, right? Just having data isn't useful unless we know what are we looking for? What would be a sign that a policy has succeeded or failed? We can now apply this sort of paradigm, this infrastructure, to look at Donald Trump's tax cuts. And I say that with some reservation because it wasn't actually a tax cut for everyone. And even some of the people who did get a tax cut in the short term, it's not a permanent tax cut, but I think you know what I'm talking about when I say the Trump, quote, tax cuts. So we've had some time. It's been a little while. Now we're starting to get a sense of the effect. But what should we measure to figure out whether the tax cuts have been successful or not? Well, I think the most relevant way to do this would be to look at what Donald Trump claimed would be the effect of the tax cuts and see if it was. And the big picture was that the tax cuts will reduce government revenue in a sort of short-term micro way, but they are going to cause the economy to grow so much, the economy is going to be on fire, that the tax cuts will pay for themselves and will reduce the deficit overall. So tax cuts go down, so government revenue goes down, but the tax cuts that rich people and corporations gets put right back into the economy, and it will trickle down and generate so much new income and productivity that government revenues will actually go up, and then they can reduce the deficit and start paying off the debt. This hasn't happened, okay? To make it very short for you, we have a new report from the National Association of Business Economics. 84% of respondents, businesses, have not changed plans as a result of the corporate tax cut. 75% say they have not, nor do they have plans to increase hiring. So think about that for a second. Corporate tax rate goes from 35% to 21%. That's a 40% cut. Okay, going from 35 to 21 is a 40% decrease in the corporate tax rate. 84% of businesses make no change to their capital investment at all. The other 16 are either increasing or some are decreasing capital investment. Remember, the other 16 aren't all increasing capital investment. Those who are increasing capital investment and are increasing hiring need to now make up for a 40% reduction to the corporate tax rate to make this tax plan deficit negative, meaning that it reduces the deficit. Obviously, it wouldn't. I mean, just think about this at the most basic level. If I'm a business owner and I get a tax cut, nothing else changes. Why do I hire people, right? Why do I go and choose to increase my operating costs by adding employees? Because I got a tax cut. I would hire more employees if there's more demand for my product or service. If I have the staff to make 100 widgets and the demand for my widgets is at 100 widgets, why would I go and hire people to be able to make 200 widgets? That would be a really dumb move. If all of a sudden the demand for my product goes up to 200 widgets, now I have a reason to go and hire employees in order to be able to accommodate that increased demand. If I get a tax cut and nobody wants more of my widgets, it would be stupid to hire more people. And the proof is in the deficit numbers. We were told this would be so good for the economy that we would start to cut away at the deficit. We might even start to pay off that national debt if we ever got to a surplus. And it's all nonsense. The reality is that we learned this week that the U.S. Treasury is going to have to maintain this increased level of borrowing, planning more than $1 trillion in borrowing for the second straight year. And it's partially because of Trump's tax cuts. It's partially because of other policies, all of which are increasing the deficit. You can argue we shouldn't be so worried about the deficit, and I would agree with you. But again, we are evaluating the policy on the basis of what Trump said it would do. It's completely predictable, and it plays right into China's hands, because to finance this deficit, we are selling long-term debt called 3, 10, and 30-year securities. Who is a big buyer of these securities? It's China. Trump told us he was going to take back control of our economy from China, and instead China and other countries are buying our debt so that we can finance our government operations despite increasing deficits, which Trump told us that he would reduce. It is lose, lose, lose. And the crazy thing about this, Pat, is that we knew it would happen. Our own government, the Congressional Budget Office, told us this is exactly what's going to happen. We knew it would happen. Serious economists knew it would happen. And they either didn't care or didn't believe it. And as usual, the estimates were right. Do you think they even care about this reality, or have they moved on to something else, Pat?
I would go even further and say that from the get-go, they knew that this wasn't going to work, that the tax cuts wouldn't just spur so much economic growth that they would pay for themselves. I think that they weren't arguing in good faith. They just wanted to serve their donors. They wanted to serve their corporate overlords. And when you think about what Trump was able to get done legislatively in his first 2 years, it wasn't much. He was pretty much impotent. He couldn't repeal Obamacare. He couldn't get his wall built, but yet again, he was able to get the tax cuts passed, and I think that's really telling.
The normal but David responses here are going to be, but David, what about X company which is hiring more people? Well, lots of companies are firing and not hiring despite getting tax cuts. But more importantly, if the tax cuts objectively created hiring more than just anecdotally, you would see most companies hiring more people, and hiring depends a lot on the underlying economic conditions, which have been good for years, although they're now slowing down. But David, what about X company which gave people raises? Lots of companies give raises periodically anyway. Others are announcing them, but are phasing them in over multiple years. Many of them would be giving raises regardless of tax cuts. What matters here is the aggregate, not individual anecdotal stories that we can tell. And the aggregate is just not good for these tax cuts. And every month we get more and more data to support that. A congressman is now formally, publicly saying he believes the current president of the United States is a Russian agent. And I'm going to talk about the use of the word agent in a second, because that's important here. So let's back up a moment. We had this FBI probe into whether Donald Trump is a Russian asset. And that was opened pretty early on in Donald Trump's presidency. We talked about that. I believe it was at the beginning of last week, if not the previous week. And part of what we learned based on the reporting of the New York Times on this issue is that the FBI was worried about Trump being a Russian asset pretty early on in his campaign, but they weren't sure how they could open up an investigation into that without the political repercussions of it that might take place. But once Donald Trump fired FBI Director James Comey to interfere in the Russia investigation, the FBI felt that this has crossed a line where now we have more than enough cover to start investigating Trump as a Russian asset. Now, I've said before, I believe Russian agent is simply not the right word here, okay? I've seen no serious suggestion that Trump is a Russian agent. An agent would be like an intelligence agent of Russia or something much more formal. Asset is a broader term. Asset could mean Trump's compromised and under the influence of Russia, for example. It could mean that he has been influenced in a way that he's not even aware of as making him an asset, but in a way that makes him useful to Russian interests as someone in power in the United States. In any case, I believe the right word would be, is he an asset, not an agent? But Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell from California is now saying publicly in interviews that he believes Trump is a Russian agent. Check out this video from an interview he did with Margaret Hoover.
At what point do you draw the line and not accuse the President of the United States without any evidence of being an agent of Russia?
Yeah, he's betrayed our country, and I don't say that lightly. I worked as a prosecutor for 7 years, and
But betraying the country, by the way, we want evidence before you say that, but you said an agent of Russia.
Yeah, he works on their behalf. Since he met with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki in July, where he took the interpreter's notes, hasn't told any U.S. official what they discussed. He has taken us out of Syria, which is a top priority of Russia. He sought to diminish or pull out the U.S. from NATO. And he's easing sanctions on Vladimir Putin's friends who are under investigation
But
in
he
the
did
Mueller.
pass sanctions against Russia. He has armed Ukraine. He has killed 200 Russians in Syria. I mean, those aren't the actions of an agent of Russia either.
He signed, I think, begrudgingly sanctions against Russia after Congress and people expressed concern, and he got backed into it. But as soon as he could, he has pulled those away. And so,
what makes him an agent of Russia, though?
So, during the campaign, the Russians were offering, and we saw this in our investigation, and free press reporting showed this, they were offering their assistance to help him. They were reaching out, whether it was the Trump Tower meeting, whether it was, the number of subject line emails we saw that said, Russia, Putin, Trump, let's connect them, whether it was trying to build a Trump Tower and Felix Sater, a Russian American who worked for President Trump, saying if we connect Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, we can engineer this and make our boy president. He never turned down those offers. In fact, after it was revealed that the Russians were attacking our democracy, he went to a press conference and said, Russia, keep doing it, essentially.
So there's a lot in there. Swalwell says Russian agent, but what he's describing is actually a Russian asset. Again, so I think it's a tactical mistake to use the wrong word, because now Swalwell is going to get absolutely crushed about that. Because again, Trump is not a Russian agent. That doesn't make sense based on what we know. He's a Russian asset, if anything, and that is the word that really should be used. But when I watch this, Pat, what I see is Eric Swalwell, a guy who's on the House Intelligence Committee, who knows a ton of stuff that is not public. I see a guy who has come to his conclusion that Trump is a Russian asset on the basis of stuff that he has seen behind closed doors, and he is trying very hard to make a case for that only with what is okay to say publicly. And that's what I see here. This is not a guy who, by virtue of his role on the House Intel Committee, is going to make this allegation if he doesn't think he has the evidence to back it up. It's just that he can't really make the case publicly because so much of what he's seen is not public at this time.
That very well may be the case, but given the fact that he can't offer up that information, I think it makes it fall flat. Because if you're going to say that the guy is a Russian agent, I think you have to present some supporting evidence to that effect if you're going to go on TV and spout that. And I think at the end of the day, these words do matter. Same thing when Democrats like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez go out there and say that they're democratic socialists when they're actually social democrats. I think you're just opening yourself up to criticism, and it's completely an unforced error.
I think it would have been smarter for Swalwell, first of all, to say Russian asset and not agent, and to say, listen, I am privy to a lot of classified information because of my role, and I can't actually talk about that right now. But where was the evidence when Donald Trump claimed Hillary Clinton committed crimes which should put her in prison? Where was the evidence when Donald Trump claimed that Obama spied on him? Where was the evidence that Obama wasn't born in the United States when Donald Trump was claiming that? Since when has evidence been required to make outrageous claims? I actually happen to have knowledge here. You will find out about it in due course, or something like that. And most importantly, he really should have said asset and not agent, because agent has one meaning and asset has another meaning. And I've seen nothing to suggest that Donald Trump is a Russian agent. So certainly at minimum, a tactical mistake by Eric Swalwell. But hopefully at some point we'll know why he's come to that conclusion. Every time I tell you how lazy Donald Trump is and how little work he's doing, how long he's spending at his golf clubs and on the golf course, how long he is spending watching TV and how he never reads, it's sort of a mixed bag. Because on the one hand, obviously, I don't want a lazy piece of crap president. I want somebody who does things and reads things and is informed and studies issues deeply, something that I just have seen no evidence Donald Trump is actually capable of. On the other hand, though, there is this sense in which, like, the less Trump does, maybe the better off we are. But according to a new report, Donald Trump has receded even further into this never-ending cycle or circle of watching Fox News and eating and tweeting. Because as of yesterday morning, Donald Trump has had nothing on his schedule all week other than lunch with Mike Pence one day and his presidential daily briefing, which for most presidents is an extensive meeting with our intelligence community after having read a bunch of stuff on paper and studied other issues related to it the night before. For Trump, the PDB, the presidential daily briefing, has been reduced to a single page, mostly pictures and charts and graphs, with a couple of bullet points. That's all that Donald Trump has had on his schedule. And reportedly, that PDB did not go well yesterday morning. Trump reportedly reaming out Dan Coats, the director of national intelligence. So what else is Trump doing? Is Trump spending so much time on the phone negotiating great deals that he needs his schedule to be completely clear? Is he involved in more secret talks with Vladimir Putin, of which there are going to be no records whatsoever? Is he about ready to get Mexico to pay for the wall and it's taking up time? Is he preparing for Black History Month, which starts on February 1st? Somehow, I don't think so. Or is he just lazy and doing nothing and worried about the storm cloud of criminality that is closer and closer to completely enveloping him? Now, you would be completely appropriate if you said, well, hold on, David, what did a day out of President Obama's schedule look like, just to compare? Very good question. I took a look. I picked a random day out of President Obama's schedule. And what you'll realize is that President Obama had a very different schedule than Trump. For example, at 9:30 a.m., this was, by the way, after President Obama would get up and either exercise or read, neither activity one that Donald Trump partakes in. 9:30 a.m., President and Vice President received the presidential daily briefing. 10 a.m., in come the senior advisors to the president. 10:30 a.m., President goes directly into a cabinet meeting. 12:15, the President and Vice President meet for lunch privately. At 1:30, the President meets with members of the Technology CEO Council. At 4:30, the President and Vice President have a meeting with Secretary of Defense Gates, even though they already had the presidential daily briefing at 9:30 in the morning. 6:20 p.m., the President delivers remarks on the situation in Egypt. And then, of course, we know that President Obama would then go to the residence and read up documents, briefings, books, nonfiction, fiction. So there's a very clear difference here, Pat. The only question is, are we better off the less Trump does?
That's a good question. I've never been able to get a conclusive answer on that. And I would just say that being lazy every now and then, that's all well and good. It's nice to veg out. Like, I'm going on vacation next week, for example, and I'm looking forward to it. But I'm not the president. I think when you decide to run for president and you get elected, you have to be able to invest that 4-year period and work as hard as you can, only take a little bit of time off here and there. And even then, you're getting working vacations. You have to be able to be committed to the job, and Trump just isn't.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other elements here as well, which is that this didn't just sneak up on Trump. Trump actually said, I'm going to be so busy, I'm not going to be leaving the White House. There's not going to be any golfing or anything like that. He's setting records for how much he golfs. And if we look at Trump's tweets this week, they're seeming like kind of extra flaccid and weak. And I think that there may be something just more generally going on with him. Check out this example. Trump tweeted yesterday, if the committee of Republicans and Democrats now meeting on border security is not discussing or contemplating a wall or physical barrier, they are wasting their time. Yeah, all right, okay. You've said that before, and it's pretty boring, and it doesn't really seem to have any power behind it now that you completely lost the shutdown. So my question to the audience is as follows. Should we be critical of this lazy imposter president? Or should we be glad that he's not actually doing things, since what he does is bad for the country and for the world? A lot of people wrote to me saying, yeah, the less involved Trump is, the better off everyone is. But I don't think it's that simple. And the reason why is Trump told us he was going to hire the best people. Obviously, that hasn't happened. Even when Trump is just watching Fox and Friends, those horrible cabinet members and staffers are still out there damaging the world. It's really a double-edged sword, and I could sort of see it from both sides. But what we do know for sure is the guy's barely doing a damn thing. In the middle of all the craziness of the last couple days, this next story really didn't get the attention that it deserves. Donald Trump has this interim attorney general, Matthew Whitaker. This is the guy I've previously told you said that only Christians should be federal judges. This is the guy who in the past has outlined, as a private citizen, of course, exactly how he would interfere with the Trump-Russia probe if given the chance. And he gave a couple of days ago a bizarre and confused, and I guess rambling would be the other adjective I would apply to it, bizarre, confused, and rambling speech while sweating profusely. And he lets things slip during this speech that are really odd. So pay very close attention to what he says, which we'll talk about shortly, but also notice both if you're just listening, but also if you're watching, the really strange demeanor and dynamics of his speech.
You know, I've been fully briefed on the investigation, and, you know, I look forward to Director Mueller delivering the final report, and I really am not going to talk about open and ongoing investigation otherwise, but, you know, sort of the statements that I made were as a private citizen, only with publicly available information, and I am comfortable that the decisions that were made are going to be reviewed, you know, either through the various means we have, but right now, you know, the investigation is, I think, close to being completed, and I hope that we can get the report from Director Mueller as soon as possible.
He truly doesn't seem to know what he's talking about. He doesn't seem to know what he's saying. It seems like one of those moments where the brain becomes disconnected from the mouth and things just come out. So when he says he's been fully briefed on the investigation, by whom and to what degree? Like what exactly is he talking about when he says he's been fully briefed about the investigation? Everything he said before about how he would end and interfere with the investigation, forget about all of that stuff he says, because those were comments that he made as a private citizen. But the most disturbing thing that he said here, which again, this is not getting nearly the attention it deserves, he said that he's comfortable that the decisions that were made with regard to the investigation are going to be reviewed. What on earth does that mean, Pat? Who is going to review them? For what purpose? What is he talking about? What does that even mean?
Well, he is technically Robert Mueller's boss. That's the crazy world that we live in. So maybe he has been personally briefed, but I suspect that he hasn't, and he's talking out of his you-know-what.
And then he gets to the investigation is close to being completed. It didn't even really seem like he was trying to say that. He sort of stuttered in a very strange way. We know that we haven't had any leaks from Mueller about when the investigation is going to be over. Would Mueller, even considering that, yes, in some harebrained and horrible way, as Pat points out, Whitaker is Mueller's boss, would Mueller have said to Matthew Whitaker that he's almost done? Is Whitaker guessing that the investigation is almost over? Is he hoping that it's almost over? Is he trying to, by saying this publicly, push the investigation to actually end soon? Whitaker's involvement in the Justice Department has just been a train wreck from day one. Everything related to the guy is weird. And as far as this investigation ending soon thing that he said deliberately or not deliberately, truthfully or untruthfully, Whitaker's wife is named Marcy Whitaker. She recently emailed a reporter from Slate to tell him that his article is bad and wrong, and also to assert that the Mueller investigation is wrapping up. Those were the words that Marcy Whitaker said to a member of the media, that the Mueller investigation is wrapping up. How would Matthew Whitaker's wife know that, even if it's true? That's extraordinarily inappropriate, whether it's true or not. Marcy Whitaker doesn't work in government. She doesn't have a security clearance. So if she's lying and just emailing reporters that the investigation is going to end when she actually doesn't know anything about that, that's inappropriate. But if Matthew Whitaker has told his wife things that aren't available to the public, that's criminal, okay? Just imagine for a second here if the roles were reversed and it was, I don't know, Hillary Clinton, Attorney General, and you had her husband, Bill Clinton, emailing reporters with information that was at that point unknown to the public. They would be calling for her immediate imprisonment pat. And yet here we have Matthew Whitaker in way over his head without the slightest idea what's going on, what's appropriate. And as far as the probe is ending, maybe he's right, maybe he's not. But there is something very wrong going on here.
Well, the upside is that Matthew Whitaker will only be the acting attorney general for another week or two. The downside is that his replacement, William Barr, he expressed that he's not going to interfere with the Mueller investigation, but Democrats can't get a straight answer as to whether he'll release the full report to the public. And that we really got to know. William Barr could be just as bad.
Yeah, this is now becoming the new question, which is, okay, allowing an investigation to go on is correct. It's fine. It's sort of like a baseline. It shouldn't even be a question as to whether the attorney general is going to interfere with ongoing investigations. But then the question is, are we going to be able to see the results of that investigation? And he has played very, very coy and avoided just giving a straight answer on that during his confirmation hearings. Will the investigation end soon? I don't know. I mean, every 3 to 4 weeks, we see articles claiming Mueller's almost done. And those articles date all the way back to almost 2 years ago in 2017. We know we haven't seen leaks from Mueller. I question whether Mueller would go to Whitaker and say, I'm about to be done. Maybe Mueller did do that. But on the other hand, when I see that the FBI conducts a pre-dawn raid on Trump associate Roger Stone so that he can't destroy evidence as the FBI shows up, that doesn't signal to me that the investigation is close to done. It would strike me as a signal that there's still work to be done here. The truth is we don't know. The reality is there have not actually been any leaks from Robert Mueller as far as that goes. So we'll have to wait and see. But what is very, very clear is that Matthew Whitaker is in way over his head. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and it's a good thing that he's going to be out sooner than later. Then we become concerned about his replacement, and that really is a problem. Make sure you're following me on Instagram at david.pakman, where I just announced some new upcoming public speaking engagements that I will be doing. Maybe one will be coming to your city or town or indoctrinated liberal college campus. Who knows? Follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. Make sure you follow The David Pakman Show on Instagram also at David Pakman Show. Former NFL football player Arian Foster joins me next to talk about, is Tom Brady the greatest of all time? We get through that topic very quickly, is my prediction. We will also talk about his leaving religion and becoming an atheist, the national anthem protests by football players, and much, much more. Arian Foster joins me next. Okay, when I started preparing this story, I thought that the big news that I would be reporting to you would be plainly that Roger Stone has been arrested and charged with multiple crimes, right? It's another Trump insider who has fallen, getting closer and closer to Donald Trump himself. And that is a huge story. This pre-dawn FBI raid being used because Robert Mueller understandably was worried that Roger Stone would try to destroy evidence if given the opportunity. But the even bigger story is that now Roger Stone is no longer ruling out cooperating with Robert Mueller. This is the guy, Stone, who was never going to flip, the guy that Trump was holding up as a hero for not cooperating. He might be cooperating. Check out my interview, by the way, with Roger Stone, which we republished to the YouTube channel, where, of course, he denies all wrongdoing of all kinds. No one's going to get him for anything because he just did nothing wrong ever. Obviously, that doesn't appear to have been the case, although he is still obviously innocent until proven guilty. The details here are that he is being charged for lying to the House Intelligence Committee about interactions with WikiLeaks in the 2016 campaign, obstruction, witness tampering. This series of charges is huge in a few different ways. Number one, it's more connections to Russia, and that's huge, and Stone is right in there with it. Here is Stone, by the way, leaving the courthouse on the day of his arrest to chants of "lock him up" from the crowd.
Move, move!
What a show. I mean, just absolutely stunning. So more connections to Russia, more chance to lock him up. But the real question now that we know more about how yeah, WikiLeaks was involved in helping Trump defeat Hillary. And yeah, Stone was in talks with WikiLeaks. And yes, Donald Trump's public statements about document dumps seem to correlate really closely with WikiLeaks, suspiciously so. The question now is, was Trump really totally in the dark about the Stone connections to WikiLeaks and therefore to Russia? As I've said before, it's very hard to believe that Trump was in the dark about the Trump Tower meeting with a Russian lawyer, and it's just as difficult to believe that he didn't know that WikiLeaks was helping his campaign. So all of this is huge. But then remember this tweet from last month? Donald Trump tweeting, quoting Roger Stone, "I will never testify against Trump." This statement was recently made by Roger Stone, essentially stating that he will not be forced by a rogue and out-of-control prosecutor to make up lies and stories about President Trump. Nice to know that some people still have guts. Well, not so fast, because we now have Roger Stone telling George Stephanopoulos on ABC that he is no longer ruling out cooperating with Robert Mueller. Take a look at this.
You say you won't bear false witness against President Trump. Are you prepared to tell the truth about your dealings with him to the special counsel, your truth about your dealings with the campaign? Any chance you'll cooperate with special counsel Robert Mueller if he asks?
You know, that's a question I'd have to determine after my attorneys have some discussion. If there's wrongdoing by other people in the campaign that I know about, which I know of none, but if there is, I would certainly testify honestly. I'd also testify honestly about any other matter, including any communications with the president. It's true that we spoke on the phone, but those communications are political in nature, they're benign, and there is certainly no conspiracy with Russia. The president's right. There is no Russian collusion.
And he's never suggested to you in any way, shape, or form that he might offer you a pardon?
Absolutely, positively not. I have never discussed a pardon. The only person that I had advocated a pardon for, as we've discussed previously, is a posthumous pardon for Marcus Garvey.
Yeah, so lots of caveats, lots of ifs and conditionals, but that is not a no, I will not cooperate. And that's already a major change from what Donald Trump at least seemed to believe about Roger Stone as recently as 6 weeks ago. So there's a few things here. Ignore the fact that Roger Stone spent 12 minutes professing his innocence here. Trump tweeted now to distance himself from Roger Stone over the weekend. Roger Stone didn't even work for me anywhere near the election, an election, of course, with a capital E, but that's neither here nor there. So Stone understands that he's in trouble because he's now no longer ruling out cooperating with Robert Mueller. Of course, to tell the truth, if he knew of anything which he doesn't know about, he probably sees that Trump is bailing on him, going from touting him as a hero from not cooperating just 6 weeks ago to saying, Roger Stone who? He didn't even work for me anywhere near this campaign. So read between the lines, and Roger Stone went from it's all a witch hunt to I'd cooperate if my lawyers thought that it was a good idea in the matter of effectively what is just hours. Stunning. We are going to follow it. And of course, it could be a while until we actually see what sort of consequences there are going to be for Roger Stone here, because these things don't always take place as quickly as we might like to see. Okay, I guess we sort of have to talk about Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Donald Trump's press secretary. Where to even start with this? On Monday or Tuesday, we talked about how she gave her first press briefing in 41 days. It was riddled with the same non-answers, deflections, and blaming Democrats that we've seen from her for a very long time at this point. And one of the questions that I've asked more and more about Sarah Huckabee Sanders is, why is she doing this? Because she's so publicly lying just endlessly. Why has she chosen to do this? Why does she work for Trump at all? But more importantly, why is she doing something so public? She could be pushing papers for the Trump administration in some back office, but she's the front and center primary liar who has to go out there and defend and obfuscate for Donald Trump's benefit. And I've floated a few different ideas about why she may be doing this. One possibility is she gets paid really well. Well, we know what she gets paid, and it's a nice White House top-tier salary, but Her father, Mike Huckabee, has somewhere around $10 million. I don't think that she has to be doing this job for the money, and she could probably get another job making a decent salary, maybe not what she makes working at the White House. Is it possible that she is a religious woman and is the daughter of a preacher or whatever else Mike Huckabee is, that she believes that she is doing God's work in some way, that God has called her to be press secretary of the United States? Maybe now we're sort of starting to get a little bit closer, and it seems that God is a big part of the explanation. Because when you look back and say, wait a second, why would a so-called Christian be so willing to lie and to distort and to attack reporters and do everything that Sarah Huckabee Sanders is doing, unless she thinks the big picture is that she's doing God's work because Trump was appointed by God, for example? This was merely hypothetical until now, because Sarah Huckabee Sanders was interviewed on one of the most depraved television channels around, Christian Broadcasting Network, and she has confirmed that, yes, she believes God wanted Donald Trump to be president. Take a look.
I think God calls all of us to fill different roles at different times, and I think that he wanted Donald Trump to become president, and that's why he's there. And I think he has done a tremendous job in supporting a lot of the things that people of faith really care about.
Exactly. If it wasn't for God, Trump wouldn't be president. That's a very strange sense of humor for God, isn't it? It wasn't Trump's foreign policy. It wasn't Trump's trade ideas. It wasn't the implication that Mexicans are by and large criminals, although some Trump is sure are good people. God just wanted Trump to be president of the United States, and that's why he's there. And by extension, that is why Sarah Huckabee Sanders is also there, lying day in and day out, or every 41 days when she actually does press briefings, or whenever the case may be. So what I'm wondering is every American president there because God wanted them to be? Because if she believes that God wanted Trump to be president, doesn't it stand to reason, isn't it logically required that God wanted President Obama to be president twice rather than just once? Except, Pat, we never hear them actually mentioning that ever. In fact, we hear Obama was the Antichrist, or Obama is Satan's, or something like that.
Well, God is an independent voter. So back in the 90s, he was a Democrat. That's why he pushed for Bill Clinton. Then in the early 2000s, he went Republican, went with George Bush, then went back to Democrat with Obama, and now he's here with Trump. I guess God just can't make up his mind. Which political party does he support? We may never know. It changes all the time.
And this sort of gets to the absurdity of what I discussed with Arian Foster yesterday, which was former NFL player Arian Foster said, yeah, I never really understood when players say that that they won the game because of God. Under what circumstances is God sort of deciding the outcome of individual NFL football games? Along these same lines, if you believe God is picking presidents, then he's picking all of them, right? Including Barack Obama 2 times. So this is all so crazy. I want to zoom out from it a little bit because there's an important element to evangelicals here that I think bears some examination. Evangelicals, among other Christians and other religions, but in the United States, evangelicals are some of the loudest that do exactly what Sarah Huckabee Sanders is doing. They confuse or they conflate what they want with God's will. I wanted Trump to be president of the United States, and I'm religious, and Trump is president, so God wanted it, right? I wanted to, in the case of George W. Bush, I wanted to go to Iraq, and I'm a born-again evangelical Christian. So clearly, God told Bush to go into Iraq. It's a combination of a very particular brand of religious delusion with egoism in very specific proportions that get you in your head to believing stuff like this. Trump is there because God wanted him to be there. Self-interest is sort of the focus of their morality. And of course, it's ridiculous by its own merits. Why would God want the adulterous, cheating, lying criminal who was pro-choice his entire life, coming from people out of money and conning people out of money as well, contractors, customers at Trump University. If God is involved in selecting presidents, why on earth would he pick one that goes so directly against the gospel that Sarah Huckabee Sanders claims to follow? A truly disgusting human being, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, maybe the worst in the administration for her role in the propaganda. And our suspicions were true. She is willing to, I would guess, go against what her religion teaches her about lying and honesty and all of that other stuff, because she believes that the broad strokes, the big picture, is that God chose Trump to be president, and therefore her participation in the administration is, in a literal sense, godly. It's disgusting, and these are the people that are in charge. These are the agenda setters. These are the people who decide. They have gatekeeping power to decide what we know and what don't we know about what President Trump is doing. We're in real trouble. Make sure you're following me on Instagram at david.pakman. And while you're there, follow the show on Instagram as well, at David Pakman Show.